Hi everybody, Tim Hughes here. I'm the CEO and co-founder of DLA Ignite. With me today I've got Jen, and we're going to talk about data ethics. Jen, where can people find you?
People can find me on LinkedIn, and I'm very glad to receive connections and messages. I really engage probably too much time in LinkedIn than anything else.
But you're very social, aren't you? You're very active on social media.
Yeah, I enjoy it. I think it's a great icebreaker. I tend to be quite introverted in person, actually, being a data person, but I feel I've met someone on social media before I meet them in real life, and hopefully once the pandemic is really over, there will be some more of that.
Brian Fanzo once said that social media turned a handshake into a hug.
Oh,
Uh, and
that's
I-
really
and I
nice.
yes, and I think it's a lovely thing. My business partner Adam Gray and I we presented on Tuesday at a company had an away day of their leadership, and we've been talking to them on social for probably about 2 months now. And then when we arrived, we saw, do we handshake? Do we touch? Do we handshake or whatever? And we actually just hugged because we kind of knew each other more.
Mm.
And
That's really
that's very different from the classical business arrangement where it's very formal.
Yeah, I think it's one of the nice outcomes of the pandemic in a way, that people are perhaps not relying on defaults anymore and
Mm,
rethinking things like even do a handshake or do I not. I tend to still handshake, and but I'd ask people beforehand.
mm,
Some people say actually prefer an elbow bump
mm,
or just a wave,
mm.
it's just fine. I'm just trying to be respectful of people's concerns, I guess.
So when we spoke last, um, you had just you were in the process of or launching a co-authored book, which I've written down here, and I may have it wrong. A practical guide to using third-party data in the cloud.
Yes, that was AWS pulled
Mm,
us all together actually. So I was really proud to be on it because I must admit my co-authors are people that I've really admired for such a long time.
mm.
And to see my name up against them sent me into a bit of a tailspin of imposter syndrome. But I got good feedback from my chapter. So I was really happy about that, to be honest.
But it's a fantastic thing. You got asked by AWS, and working with people that you respect and kind of look at from afar. It's brilliant.
Yeah, I'm really pleased actually, and I hope to do more of that. I think what I really like is I learn so much when I do these things
Hmm.
from other people. So it is another way to engage.
Yeah.
And like we said earlier, social media is such a great platform to do that. But being pulled together by AWS, who are fantastic cat herders. We are all in different parts of the world. We're all busy, and everyone's got different constraints and concerns at this time. So yeah, really proud I did it. But I think it's not just the output; it's the experience as well.
Hmm.
Made me really happy because I love learning. I'm still a lifelong
Hmm.
learner.
Yeah, yeah, I am as well. It's one of the reasons why I do this. I learn so much. Um, so you have a background. I've got here you got a background in data science and artificial intelligence. So tell us a little
Yes.
bit about your background then.
So I actually learned to code when I was 8 years old,
Oh
believe it or
wow.
not. I should probably have been out to play more
Hmm.
than anything else. But I was very fortunate in that some of my elder male relatives had served in places like Bletchley Park, so they knew exactly that women were very capable of these things. So they were very encouraging. So they helped me to learn to code, so that was great. So I then went on to do AI at Aberdeen University. I
Hmm.
spent a long time out in Paris as well. It was a joint degree between them and one of the universities in Paris. I enjoyed that experience enormously. I think I was very, very privileged to do that. I was very blessed. So I decided then to go into AI as a career.
Yeah.
The thing is, at the time, Y2K was the big,
Oh yes, yeah.
uh, and it's funny because I now have to explain to people what Y2K is. So that makes me feel incredibly old. But
Yes.
then I'm trying to explain to people, well, I stuck with AI. But at the time Google came along, they changed it into search technologies. I think when you know the data in an organization, you can have such a huge impact. It's certainly served me well. I've survived redundancies early in my career because I understood the data. It does make you incredibly valuable, but not only knowing the data, but being able to articulate that. I sometimes work with people who totally understand the database design, but they can't tell you unless it's dragged out of them, or perhaps it's you asking them a very specific direct question. So I think the ability to communicate that has been important to me. And I think that's where the data ethics piece starts to come in as well. I see concerns sometimes in the industry and the wider public as well. How do we use AI and how do we use it in a way for the greater and wider good rather than using it as a way just purely to make money or to increase marketing coverage where people are joining data points together to try and to try and get adverts pinged at them. I know sometimes people say things like, I feel my phone is listening to me because I've just been shown an advert, which is just exactly what I was talking about. And you have to see it's not listening. It's just the algorithms are sometimes on occasion so very well tuned that it has absolutely predicted you correctly.
I can't remember. I remember seeing an article about how many data points that Facebook needed to actually predict about you, and it wasn't very many. And if you think about how many likes and posts and that we've put on Facebook over the years, they know exactly, they know exactly what we're thinking, pretty much.
You're right. I think as well, we see this reflected in the government as well. So the national AI strategy was released this month on the 6th of October. So the nice thing about that is it really placed ethics as one of the pillars of the government strategy. The spending review will be out shortly, so we'll see how close that is to the actual output of the white paper put forward by the government. It's very close to the European Union's papers as well. So I'm really glad to see some alignment.
So you've talked and written a lot about ethics and the way that people develop. Now, we seem to see on the news and that people apologizing because they've come up with some algorithm, and then the classic example is the recruitment algorithm that only seems to pick white people for jobs and things like that. So what's your feeling about this?
I think that because humans are biased, we can't always expect AI to be unbiased. We're making a big assumption that data is values free, and I don't think that's the case. So in the examples of the algorithms you just mentioned, they're often fed with data, and those data sets are combined and compiled by researchers. And I don't know if you've seen the Netflix show, I've forgotten the name, I need to look it up. But it's really interesting because a woman of colour, researcher in the US, she was working on facial algorithms and facial recognition, and the algorithm didn't recognise her face at all until she put a white mask over it. So she put the mask over her face and then it recognised her. It turned out the data set had been made mainly of white males. So of course the algorithm is more confident about white males. So that's what it knows. So there's a bias in there immediately right from the start. So I think it's a good chance for humans, for us to be more mindful when we start to consider our own biases. And humans work on heuristics quite a lot, and that's where the heuristics come from. But it's good to check ourselves and develop that self-awareness to understand what biases are we bringing to the table, and perhaps what biases do other people have when they are interacting with us and interacting with each other. It's something I'm trying to be very mindful of every single day. I think it's really important for life, but also for people's careers as well.
I think I think we all try and do it in our day-to-day life. I mean, I'm I'm a white privileged middle class male, but I recognize that, which is a kind of bit like saying I'm Tim Hughes and I'm an alcoholic. And what I try and do when I live my life is understand that I have biases and I have privilege, and what can I do to actually not necessarily reverse that, but give everybody else a chance. And I and sometimes I overcompensate deliberately,
Mm.
because I kind of feel that that's where I need to be.
That's really kind of you, actually, and I don't think that's as common as you might think.
I don't think it is common. We've gone out and deliberately, we have actually sometimes gone out and deliberately overcompensated, especially around recruitment, because if you don't get the balance.
Yeah, it's quite difficult actually, because speaking personally, I get job offers all the time.
Mm.
And they start off by saying things like, "We have family-friendly policies." And I think, hang on a minute, you've not asked me about my skills. You've just seen, oh, there's a woman in AI, a woman in tech. We'll talk to her. And the way they're approaching me is all wrong, because I want to know what I'm bringing to the table. Oh, sorry, someone's just turned up to walk my dogs. Sorry about that. So, what I find is that people don't always think along these lines of, how to do better and be better. Because even asking these questions is a hard thing. It's quite hard to do the self-examination. But I think you're right. I think it's really kind that you do that. But I know personally, if someone comes to me and I know that they are just trying to tick a KPI somewhere about diversity and inclusion, that my colleagues, future colleagues, will not accept me, because there will always be a smell of Jennifer's just here because she's female. And there's always a smell about that. And it's not fair to me, and it's not fair to the male colleagues as well, because it's suddenly the balance is going the other way and we're not thinking about the skills. So sometimes I feel uncomfortable with women in business initiatives. I get lots of emails on
I'm
LinkedIn,
sure.
people asking me things like, we've got R&D tax credits and we're keen to support women in business. And apart from the fact that feels unfair, I feel that I should only be really subject to getting these offers because people think I can deliver, and not giving me an extra hand because I'm female and they feel that I need some extra help. And in some ways, maybe you do need help to open doors, but there's also an onus in me to prove myself and not just keep using the women in tech ticket in order to get something that someone else might be able to use to a better advantage. So I think it sits uncomfortably with me sometimes, these initiatives. I can see people sometimes taking advantage of that. And I think you're bringing us all down if you do that. An example, I think, is the Theranos example you've probably seen in the tech news at the moment.
What's that?
Oh, you have to read the book. It's called Bad Blood. Theranos is one of the scandals
Right.
in the tech industry at the moment. The founder's name was Elizabeth Holmes. She was a Stanford dropout, very much modelled in Steve Jobs. Her company at one point was worth 9 billion. She'd raised so much funding, but her products didn't work. And it was basically about medical testing. So it was supposed to be accelerated medical testing that was less invasive. But the problem was that people, the testing wasn't rigid or honest, and they were eventually caught out by the FDA in the US. So that instead of showing the actual results, they played a video of someone else's results on the screen. So it was very deceptive, I think, in generating funding. But I think people wanted to believe in this woman because
Yes.
she was young, blonde, pretty, very smart, and very dedicated. And I get all that. But at the same time, you have to deliver. And when you are, say, of a diverse background in some way, sometimes it is harder for you to unlock those doors. And I think there's loads of talent out there that is untapped. But then there's the other side of the coin, which is I shouldn't be getting opportunities just because I'm female. I personally find that a bit frustrating.
So you've worked on projects like to predict homelessness, haven't you? So tell us
Yes.
about that.
I personally love projects with a social impact. So what we did there was working for some of the London councils. The idea being that organisations like councils have a responsibility towards people who are homeless or potentially going to become homeless. So we implemented as a team, I led a small team of really brilliant, enthusiastic and passionate individuals. And we collected up all the data from different sources, put them together, and then we started to do some analysis. We used a programming language called R to do lots of statistics. So we identified individual families really who were more likely to become homeless, and we identified the things that were most likely to predict them becoming homeless. Now the output was we coordinated with the various agencies to make sure that the agencies were talking to one another because we had the data talking across different sources. And when the data is siloed, the analytics are siloed as well. I'm particularly proud of that project because they could then reach out to a number of families who were not homeless at that point, but who were at risk of it for various reasons. And honestly, none of the reasons were their fault. I would like to emphasize that. The rent goes up, the salary goes down, or they lose a job, and then they're sofa surfing for a while. And that is not a sustainable home environment for children, particularly. So, trying to preemptively get them better housing and working with the schools, the National Health Service, the social work, and the council, having a coordinated and very, very orchestrated approach to support these families. And I think it's nice when you can use data to impact the lives of families, particularly children, who you will never meet, actually. But I like to think that they will have better futures in the same way that I had a better future when I was very lucky to land funding to go to university.
Yes.
And you have to pass that forward somehow.
Yeah. Versus, you told me a story about Ryanair that built an algorithm that predicted which people were likely to sit together, therefore they would pay.
Yes, that sits uncomfortably with me because we can devise algorithms that might be technically correct, but are they correct from the people perspective? And that's the issue for me. The thing is, somebody came forward with an idea to create an algorithm that would try to identify who was most likely to pay to sit together on the plane. So someone came up with the idea, which was designed, developed, delivered, tested, deployed into production.
Signed off as
So,
in terms of the money to develop it and everything, the budget to develop
exactly. So I don't think Ryanair developed it, but they used it. It was developed, I think, by external consultancy
Yeah.
from who will remain nameless.
Mm.
But the it's the ethics. Why I know that the margins in the airline industry are very small. We, as a population, have got very little loyalty to airlines. We're very price sensitive and cost sensitive when we book flights, and understand that. But creating an algorithm to increase margins and by identifying and disadvantaging groups of individuals is really the issue. I think we have to consider the impact on people. It's actually one of the consumer groups in the UK that identified they were doing that. So I think sometimes the voices of these consumer groups are inadvertently forming a check on companies, but they're only able to do it once they go live. There are a range of toolkits in development which you can use in order to help you identify if whether you've done a series of checks as you go along. So some of these are produced by universities around the world, and I think there are some by organisations like the European Union. I would like to see a broader adoption of these at a business level so that we can stop these algorithms really before they get signed off, designs developed, because then we don't know who's accountable and who's responsible ultimately if the algorithms make a bad decision, because there's been so many parties involved. And who is accountable for that? Is it the airline company for using the algorithm in the first place? Is it the consulting firm who consulted aviation companies to see if that's something they would like? Did the market research show that? And it becomes dissipated somehow. So yes, I think actually the industry is probably rife with these sort of algorithms, and they just haven't been caught because they're making money. And I think the legislation and the ethics is not catching up with the rate of technological development.
So what do you think people should be doing? If people are going down this route, they should be looking at getting these toolkits from these universities.
Yes, I think that's one approach. I think also a wider call for people to tackle these subjects and to understand them better. There's a brilliant book by the Airbnb legal counsel,
Right.
whose name I've forgotten. I am very sorry. But Airbnb had to tackle a lot of these issues when they were being particularly a younger company. And that ranged from everything to people holding parties in other people's homes, perhaps causing damage. There was a dead body found in a property as well. So Airbnb, the legal counsel, had was absolutely very busy in the early days of Airbnb tackling issues like how do you deal with relationships in the workplace where there's an imbalance of power. So where a junior male might be in a relationship with a more senior female, what happens when they split up? So they dealt with all sorts of really great issues. Things like how do you deal proactively with relationships in the workplace? How do we think about our data and how that impacts our customers, our suppliers, our vendors, and our partners? Not just us internally. And I love his approach. He's very proactively gone out and said, this is the charter for relationships in the workplace, as an example. And, we will split people up so they're in different departments and we will do things that way, but ultimately giving the responsibility to the more senior person in the organization. And that takes courage because you have to be willing to not just interfere, but sort of put forward internally agreed rules around how that works. And a lot of companies, I think, are not willing to face the messiness that humans bring, whether that's relationships in the workplace or, thoughts about how to make money in a way that doesn't turn customers' stomachs when they find out about the AI algorithms are doing. And I think that's important.
Yeah, I work for an organisation that found out the hard way that they got taken to tribunal a number of times, and it cost them a lot of money over relationships in organisations, and they actually put rules in place, which we used to snicker about because they used to say that you can't have vertical relationships. You can't report to your wife, girlfriend, boyfriend, but you can have horizontal relationships. So you can be in a relationship with a team member or somebody else within the organisation.
Yeah, and I think it's good people tackle that, but in these examples, they've done it after.
Yes, people always do it after.
Yeah, and as we know, it's more expensive and time consuming to mop up afterwards than it is to prepare beforehand. So I really recommend the Airbnb book. Another book I really recommend is by the founder of Patagonia,
Okay,
Yves
yes.
Chouinard. I don't know
The
if you've read
clothing
that
company.
book. Yeah, it's a fantastic book because he started from ethics actually and then built the business.
Yes.
And they've made some really tough decisions based on ethics. They were the first company in the US to have on-site nurseries for their employees, which I think is great. So they really did some really groundbreaking things. But they had to make some quite difficult decisions. They did learn as they go. But fundamentally, it was all about this is who we are and this is what we stand for. And I love even the things they do. They will repair garments for you
Yeah.
rather than insist that you buy new ones. And I think if we had more companies like that, then I think the world would probably look a different place, especially with fast fashion,
Yes.
which we know is causing all sorts of really terrible consequences around the world.
Jen, thank you so much for popping in today and talking to us. It's a fascinating subject, and something that I think is really in the early days, isn't it? And something that we as custodians of the world in terms of, well, my age anyway, we need to be making sure that we pass on to the people below us the right ethics and the right belief systems. So what they develop when we're no longer here are good and proper.
Yeah, and the time to do that actually is right now. We
Yes.
can't delay anymore. I think we're at a tipping point. I do think there'll be lots of supply chain issues. We see that already in chips, and maybe that's our number's been called in, and we
Yeah.
have to do something about it.
So Jen, remind people where they can get hold of you.
Please find me on LinkedIn. I am there far too often. You can't miss me. And my name is Jen Stirrup, and thanks so much, Tim, for having me here today.
You're welcome. You're welcome. It's been a great chat, and again, we said at the beginning we love learning stuff, and I've learned stuff. There's 2 books that I'm going to go over to Amazon and go and research.
Oh, I was looking at yours this morning actually. So.
Oh, well, that's very kind of you. That's
Yeah, that's okay. So yeah, so I'm always keen to give out book recommendations. I think it's if you recommend a book, you're giving a part of yourself in a way. So
I totally agree. I totally agree. And it's one of those things where you learn a piece. You'll learn 1 or 2 things from a book, but you're a better person for it.
yes, I agree.
Thank you so much, Jen, and I'll see you soon.
See you soon. Thank you, Tim.
Thanks. Bye.